Welcome to my PowerPoint on old versus modern Hearthstone. Of course, I can't really show all the cards in the way I would like to. The deck viewer just doesn't show them properly sometimes. So I decided, screw it, I'm just going to show cards off the official website. I had to get that out of the way. But let's talk about some cards that you probably haven't seen in a long time. Of course, Flame Imp is incredibly iconic. It is a 1-mana 3/2 demon. Battlecry, deal 3 damage to your hero. It's actually genuinely probably one of the most played cards of all time, I would say. It has seen play in Zoo Warlock for the last 10 years. It still sees play today, or at least it would if it had a deck, but, you know, the deck got nerfed recently. But Flame Imp being released in 2014 really shows just, like, how powerful some early cards could have been versus what they are now. And Flame Imp, that card has just stayed on. It's 1-mana 3/2. Really good. But then you look at some other cards in here, and then you start to realize, well, they didn't age very well. Doomguard is a 5-mana 5/7 demon with charge, battlecry, discard 2 random cards. Back in, well, 2014, card draw was not really that common, so discarding your cards when you had almost no cards in hand wasn't that big of a deal, especially because you're Warlock. Warlock has Life Tap. Life Tap lets you draw 2 cards every turn, while every other class was only getting 1 card a turn if they didn't have card draw cards. So being able to run cards like Doomguard were significantly better when you had less cards in hand, but nowadays aggro decks have a lot of card draw. Especially in Warlock. Warlock, you know, has some of the most efficient card draw in the entire game. So cards like Doomguard that, you know, are giant stat sticks with charge don't work anymore. They just kind of don't. Of course, you know, there are cards that benefit from being discarded, and that's a different story, but we're talking about the average kind of Zoo Warlock that can't really make use of a card like Doomguard anymore. And then you get to the fact that when you actually take a look at the list that I put over there, there's a lot of neutral cards. If you guys hadn't noticed, back in 2014, you know, class cards kind of sucked. There weren't that many good class cards. There's 5 class cards in this deck. That's crazy. Of course, it was a class by class basis, right? Some classes had better, 2014 classic cards. Some of them had nothing playable in the terms of Priest. I think Priest literally had Power Word Shield and, like, Northshire Cleric, and that's it. But, I mean, looking at some of these cards, you have Dark Iron Dwarf. It's a 4-mana 4/4 with Battlecry, give a minion +2 attack this turn. There used to be a 3-mana 1/5 from Festival of Legends that was Battlecry, give a minion +4 attack while this is alive. It was a 3-mana 1/5 that would give a minion +4 attack as long as the 1/5 lived. Versus, yeah. So you can really see just how weak 2014 Hearthstone really was. I mean, going down the list, right? It used to run Direwolf Alpha. 2-mana 2/2 beast, adjacent minions have +1 attack. Knife Juggler. Okay, to be fair, Knife Juggler is actually good again because of Death Knight, but still. Even cards like Shatter Sun Cleric and Defender of Argus used to see play in aggro decks. Because, well, it was all about using the most efficient cards, and Defender of Argus was a 4-mana 2/3 that would deal 2 damage as long as you buffed minions on the turn you played it, and gave them taunt. Shattered Sun Cleric would deal 1 damage the turn you played it, and make your minions harder to kill. Hit minions being harder to kill is, it's really good. Especially when, you know, removal was worse back then as well. You're typically just bumping minions, so having minions that get enough stats to get out of bumping range mattered a lot. But then let's compare it to Pain Warlock from Perils in Paradise. This is, of course, before the Party Fiend was nerfed, but yeah. You still run cards like Flame Imp. Flame Imp is, of course, a very powerful 1-drop. I already talked about how it's been in, like, every Zoo Warlock since 2014. It really has. Like, if you look back at almost any kind of Zoo Warlock list, it's been in them, and it's kind of insane that it has. But let's look at some other cards, like Party Fiend. It's a 1-mana 1/1 demon with Battlecry, summon 2 1/1 Fell Beasts, deal 3 damage to your hero. It's a 1-mana 3/3. Yeah, it somehow power creeps Flame Imp. I know, right? You have other cards like Blood Treant, which is a 5-mana 2/2 with cost health instead of mana, so it's actually a 0-mana 2/2. And then let's look at the list itself. almost every single card in this list has some way of synergizing with each other. You have Infernal, which is a 4-mana 6/6 with Taunt, Battlecry, set your hero's health to 15. It's actually incredible for healing yourself after you've done a disgusting amount of damage to yourself throughout the game because they were damaged cards. You have Imprisoned Horrors, which are 9-mana 4/4s with cost 1 less for each damage you've taken on your turns this game. Benefits incredibly from your Flame Imps, Party Fiends, Blood Treants. You can actually get it out on turn 1 on the coin if you have a good enough hand, which is really disgusting. And then Molten Giant. Molten Giant has only gotten better as time goes on, as you get more powerful self-damage effects, unlike in Classic, where it kind of didn't make any sense to run it in a Zoo Warlock deck. You're never getting low enough to be able to play it. That's the key thing, is synergy. Synergy between cards is at the highest that it has ever been, and only gets higher every single expansion. 2014, there was little to no synergy. You ran a bunch of neutral cards that were just good stats for the cost, and that was good enough. That was honestly good enough in Hearthstone for a couple of years. It kind of really died out as early as 2019, I would say. You know, back in 2018, 2017, you ran cards like Fungalmancer, which is a 5-mana 2/2 Battlecry, give adjacent minions +2/+2. You know, basically Defender of Argus. You used to run Bone Mare, which was a 7-mana... Oh gosh, was it a 7-mana 6/6 or 7-mana 4/4 Battlecry, give a minion +4/+4 and Taunt? And then and that card even got nerfed. Bone Mare even got nerfed. And those are just neutral minions that would give a lot of stats. And that's all they really did. They didn't really have any synergy towards them. They just would fight for board pretty well, and they were just good enough cards. You don't really see that anymore in Hearthstone. You see cards that, well, synergize with each other. And synergize they do. But let's talk about some other decks from 2014. But technically this is a 2015 deck because I wanted to talk about this version specifically. Wallet Warrior from 2015. This deck was... I mean, I remember that people used to find it egregious that Wallet Warrior used to cost so much dust back in the day. And now decks cost way more. Typically, it's because they're also Highlander decks, so they run one-ofs, but... I mean, this deck costs 12,000 dust, and that's not even that expensive compared to decks nowadays. But let's look at the deck. We have cards like Justicar Trueheart. It used to be 6 mana. I think it was also a 6/4. Battlecry, replace your starting hero power with a better one. You would go from Armor Up, which is 2 mana, gain 2 armor, to Tank Up, which is 2 mana, gain 4 armor. I mean, back in the day, Hearthstone decks used to not really be able to do that much once you got enough armor. OTK decks used to not be as good as they are now. They weren't nearly as fast, and getting a lot of armor from just pressing the button every turn and then passing used to be really good. You ran cards like Brawl, which is a 5-mana spell, destroy all minions except one, chosen randomly. Brawl was good for a few years, do not get me wrong, but it's fallen off like significantly over the past few years, and it's been replaced by a lot of different cards, so it doesn't really hold up today as it used to, but Brawl is such an iconic removal card, and it's crazy, right? And then we have cards like Grommash Hellscream. 8 mana, 4/9, charge, has +6 attack while damage. You used to actually have to, like, play for tempo and hit your opponent in the face in control decks. I'm not joking. Control decks were not actually control decks back in the day. They were mid-range decks. And I'm using the Magic the Gathering definition for mid-range, where it's more minion-focused removal, rather than the Hearthstone definition, which is more about, like, I don't know, playing towards the mid-game and playing for board, and then sometimes being able to trade. But, like, these decks, they were more focused on playing a control style, but more minion-focused than spell-focused. So that's whatever. We're not going to get into that. But let's look at it. You had cards like Acolyte of Pain, which was 3 mana 1/3. Whenever this takes damage, draw a card. That used to be one of the best ways to draw cards in Warrior. You're going to see the card draw that Warrior has now when I show you, and you're going to be like, wow, that used to be one of the best cards in Warrior. Piloted Shredder used to be like one of the best cards in the entire game due to the fact that the 2-drop pool was So small, you were pretty consistently hitting at least a 2-mana 2/3. You know, sometimes you would get like a 2/2 with an effect or things like that. But it's a 4-mana 4/3 mech with Death Battle, summon a random 2-cost minion. This card used to be insane. Piloted Shredder could get its... I could do an entire video on Piloted Shredder alone and how they like specifically went out of their way to make this card bad. I'm not joking. And Piloted Shredder, this card would never hold up nowadays. A 4-mana 4/3 summon a 2-drop? There's cards that do that now for like 3 mana. The new Soulbound Spire Starship piece for Death Knight is a 3-mana 2/2 summon a random 2-drop. That gets buffed whenever or it summons a higher cost minion whenever you give it stats. Compare that to Piloted Shredder, yeah. But the thing about like this deck is it did have a lot of value. You used to run Ysera, 9 mana for 12 dragon. At the end of your turn, get a, I think it was get a random dream card, but they changed how Ysera works recently. I don't remember what they did exactly, but I don't think it was 2 like it says now. The value you would get from just dropping down Ysera used to be good enough. Ysera used to be good enough. If you played Ysera in today's game, you lose. You lose the game. I'm not joking. You would actually lose the game because of the gigantic tempo loss of playing a 9 mana 4/12 that does nothing for at least 2 turns. Like, looking at this deck, it really makes you think, wow, look how terribly weak this was, and like half of the cards that are being shown right now are buffed versions of what they used to be. Acolyte of Pain got buffed. Big Game Hunter, I think at the time was 3 mana, but got nerfed to 5. Now it's 4. True Heart used to be 6. Shield Block used to draw you, or be 3 mana. Execute used to be 2 mana. Slam used to be 2 mana. Bash used to be 3 mana. Like, let that tell you how much stronger the game is now, that a lot of the cards on this list got buffed and still don't see any play. Like, or at least not very much. Just True Heart especially. But compare that to Odin Warrior from the newest expansion. This deck is insane. It really is. You have cards like Garrosh's Gift, which is a 1-mana spell. Discover a temporary, which means it will discard at the end of the turn. Copy of Execute, Shield Block, or Brawl. Remember what I was saying? That, like, Brawl and Execute weren't that good? Yeah, when you get them on demand for 1 mana, and then you also get the option to pick Shield Block, which now costs 2 mana, that's pretty good. It really is. You have New Heights, which is a 3 mana Druid. You heard me right. Druid spell. Increase your maximum mana by 3 and gain an empty mana crystal. Warrior now can ramp because of the card Ham the Hungry. It's a 6 mana 3/3 Druid Tourist. Taunt at the end of each turn, or end of your turn, eat a minion in your opponent's deck to gain +2/+2. So it also acts as a disruption card. And then, to top it off, we have Odin. It's 9 mana. The Hearthstone website is broken and only ever shows it at 8 mana. I've reported it 100 times. It is a 9 mana 8/8 with Battlecry. For the rest of the game, after your hero gains armor, they gain that much attack for the turn. Long gone are the days of Control Warrior mirrors where you just hero power pass and go to fatigue and try to outlast your opponent. Now, control decks have win conditions. Every single one. And if they don't, they're not playable. Win conditions are so utterly necessary for control decks in Hearthstone nowadays that it really does make it seem like control is dead. Yeah, obviously it's not, but I mean, the fact that every control deck has to have a win condition really does make you question what's the difference between a slow combo deck and a control deck. I mean, like, right? If you look at this one, you could be mistaken for this deck and think that it is a slow combo deck rather than a control deck. You could, and I wouldn't blame you. But let's compare some of the cards that you have today. You have Stone Skin Armor, which is a 2 mana 2/2 Battlecry. If your armor changed this turn, draw 2 cards. So if you hero power, if you attack a minion and lose armor yourself, if you play any spells, you get to draw 2 cards for a 2-drop, a 2 mana 2/2. Compare that to Acolyte of Pain. Wow. You have Blade Storm, which is a 2 mana. Why does it show 3? 2 mana, deal 1 damage to all minions, repeat until one dies. how incredibly efficient is that removal? No longer do you have to focus on fighting for board with minions. You can now use spells as better removal than you could before. Yeah, the deck does run, like, a couple minions that are pretty good for fighting for board, right? You run Ziliax, which is the best card. I think it's not crazy to say Ziliax is the best card ever made. It's been nerfed so many different times. It lets you do so many different things. You can customize your Ziliax in a bunch of different ways, but this one is a 9-mana 6/5 with Divine Shield, Taunt, Lifesteal, Rush. 2 of those did not exist in the game back in 2024, by the way. And Battlecry, summon a copy of this. You heard me right. I mean, look at some of the cards you have access to as well. Sleep Under the Stars is a 7-mana spell. Choose thrice to either draw 2 cards, gain 5 armor, or refresh 3 mana crystals. That means that if you play it after Odin, it's 7 mana, deal 15 damage. Compare that to Garrosh, and well, Garrosh could go up to 10 damage for 8 mana, and if you dealt damage to it by either breaking your Death Spite or playing like Whirlwind or something. Yeah. And to top it off, like, you have cards that are just insane. Ignis, the Eternal Flame, is a 4-mana 2/4 with Battlecry. If you forge this game, which means if you played a card that has Forge on it and you drag it over your deck, spend 2 mana to upgrade it, you can build a custom weapon. They come in 1, 5, or 10, and their stats are from like 2/2 to... Oh gosh, I don't know what the stats of the weapons are. I'm not even gonna pretend. But the main thing is that you can give the weapons effects. They can have, like, poisonous and deal damage, or after hero attacks, gain armor and Wind Fury, or after hero attacks, summon a minion and Wind Fury, or gain immune while attacking, or have cleave on your weapon. All these different things. Like, the difference between old Warlock and new Odin Warrior is night and day. And look how much more expensive this deck is. It's 1,000 dust more expensive. And Warlock Warrior used to be considered egregious for how expensive it was. It really did. This deck, I mean, this isn't even like a broken deck. This isn't even considered like a top tier deck, which is crazy, right? That you have so much more power in your decks nowadays that they're still not even considered broken. And then we have a combo deck, Miracle Rogue. If you hadn't realized, I was trying to do an aggro deck, a control deck, and a combo deck and compare them to what they have today. So we're talking about Miracle Rogue. Oh my gosh. Miracle Rogue is really interesting because, well, there's a lot of direct comparisons between this and the new list, or the new deck that I'm going to be showing you, and a lot of them are straight power creep. Straight power creep, no question. You have cards like Shiv, which was a 2-mana spell, deal 1 damage, draw a card. This was power creeped forever ago with Ghostly Strike, which is 1-mana draw a card combo, or 1-mana deal 1 damage combo, draw a card. You have Edwin Van Cleef, which, I mean, Edwin probably would see play in Standard now, actually. I'm going to be real with you, it probably would see play if it was in Standard, but it's not. So, it's a 3-mana, it did see play until it was rotated, actually. 3-mana 2/2, combo, gain +2/+2 for each other card you've played this turn. And Azure Drake is a 5-mana 4/4 at the time. Now it's a 4/5. Dragon with spell damage +1. Battlecry, draw a card. Yeah, when I show you the rogue list, you're gonna be like, wow, these are cards that used to be ran in Hearthstone. The thing about Hearthstone is you used to play Gadgets and Auctioneer as your main draw engine. The deck didn't have that much card draw otherwise. It had, let's look through it. Blood Mage Thalanos, Shiv, Fan of Knives, and Azure Drake. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense that Gadgets and Auctioneer was your primary draw tool. You used to use the card Conceal, which was a 1-mana spell, give your minions stealth until your next turn. You would play Auctioneer, and then you would play Conceal, and then you would pop off on your next turn. Yeah, that's what was considered good enough for a combo turn back in 2014. Playing a 5-mana 4/4, then playing a 1-mana spell to give it stealth. Oh boy. It has a lot of other cards that still are relatively decent today, like Deadly Poison, Preparation, Shadow Step, but That's also because Rogue has like one of the best classic sets of any class, and Rogue Rogue is like the best class of all time. It really is. Anyone that tries to tell you otherwise is kind of lying. If you include Wild, you can make the argument that it's probably Warlock or maybe Druid, but if you include just Standard, it's definitely Rogue, and it carries off the fact that Rogue's classic set was so unbelievably strong. Backstab, Shadow Step, Preparation, Deadly Poison, Cold Blood, Eviscerate, Fan of Knives, Edwin Fangleaf, SI7 Agent, even Sap and, like, Blade Flurry, right? Like, it was so unbelievably strong. Now let's look at the new list, which is Quazar Rogue. So, don't get me wrong, Quazar Rogue might not be that good. It probably isn't any good. But compare it to 2014 Hearthstone and wow, right? So the whole idea behind Quazar Rogue is that you play Quazar, a 6-mana spell, shuffle your hand into your deck, reduce the cost of cards in your deck by 3. So, if every card in your deck costs 3 or less, they all cost 0. And we all know that when you have 0 cost cards, that's really good. The main idea of this list in particular is that you play cards like Quick Pick, which is a 2-mana 1/2 weapon. After your attacks, draw a card to cycle through your deck. Once you've discounted, you can set it up preemptively. You have Knick-Knack Shack, which is a 3-mana location, which is you play it down and then you can activate it. Your opponent can't interact with it without specific cards that target locations, and then it opens after 2 turns. The Perils in Paradise locations have an additional condition where it's Knick-Knack Shack is 3 mana, draw a card. If you play it this turn, reopen it. All the Perils in Paradise ones have that additional condition to reopen if you meet their condition. So, again, you play this preemptively before Quazar, and then you can draw a million cards. And then you have Ethereal Oracle. 3 mana, 2/3, spell damage +1, spell burst, draw 2 cards. Compare that to Azure Drake. Yeah, comparing that to Azure Drake should definitely tell you about the difference in power level between 2014 and 2024. It's night and day. The card draws you 2 cards. And Azure Drake, like, I think, didn't Azure Drake get nerfed at one point? It might not have. I might be lying or misremembering. I don't remember, dude. But still. So what you do is you discount your entire deck. You have Quick Pick and Knick-Knack Shack set up. You can play Prep Quazar as early as turn 3, typically turn 4. And then your entire deck costs 0. You play Blood Mage Thalnos, which, I mean, that card still sees play. For its spell damage specifically, you play Ethereal Oracle for its spell damage, and then you draw a million cards. You can play Mic Drop, which is a 3-mana, draw 2 cards. Finale, give your weapon +2 attack, so you can even buff your Quick Pick if you have no mana left, because Finale is, if you play a card with 0 mana remaining, it triggers its effect. So that's 0 mana, draw 2 cards. You have cards like O Manager, which is 2 mana, deal 2 damage, get a coin, or combo, get a coin. So it's free and gives you more mana and deals a lot of damage. You have Harmonic Hip Hop, which is 2 mana, deal 1 damage, give your weapon +3 attack. Again, buffs your Quick Pick. Tentacle Grip, 2 mana, deal 3 damage, combo, get a 1/1 Chaotic Tentacle. You don't really care about the tentacle, it doesn't matter. Eviscerate, which again used to see play in the old list. Fan of Knives, which you used to see play in the old list. And you just click your opponent's face with a lot of spell damage and a lot of spells from hand. And this deck is considered bad. This is considered a weak deck that is inconsistent in comparison to Miracle Rogue back in 2014, which was considered a really good deck. And this deck can technically kill you on turn 4, and people consider it a weak deck. It is very inconsistent. Sometimes you just brick uncontrolled. You just completely brick, right? This list doesn't look like it has too many bricks in it, actually, which is nice, but Dubious Purchase can brick because it's a 4-mana spell, and you only discount it by 3, so if you play it on turn 4 and you top deck that, you could actually, lose. But this is what I'm talking about. Like, comparing Miracle Rogue from 2014 to 2024, it's night and day. And this is a Miracle Rogue deck. I could have shown wild decks if I wanted to, and that would have been, evil. It would have been evil to show wild decks, because if I showed Miracle Rogue from, like, the pack Knoll Miracle Rogue compared to that Miracle Rogue, it doesn't even look remotely close. It probably runs like 2 cards that are the same, which is insane. But yeah, that's gonna be it from me. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I know this is a little weird video, but I wanted to really talk about like how different cards and decks were from 10 years ago. I guess technically 9 for Odin Warrior standards, but and how things have changed so much, how decks have evolved, and how a lot of things that we used to have in the game don't really make sense anymore, especially when it comes to synergies and random minions. That's gonna be it for me. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.
Shadows are rising again!
Darker than they've ever been. As evil descends from the skies, the world cries out, how will we survive? Out of the hall of explorers, and up from the dusty tombs, they grab their whips and fedoras. These legends of the past know exactly what